位贵宾，大家好，欢迎回到 TWIGF 2026。接下来这场论坛主题非常精彩，是数位主权与风险环境下的基础设施韧性，后量子时代的风险与挑战。这场座谈将会以中英的混合形式进行。Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to TWIGF 2026. The session is Resilient Digital Infrastructure under Digital Sovereignty and Risk Environment. Joining us both here in the hall and virtually, please welcome our moderator, Crystal Xu, Head of Government Affairs at Cisco. Our panelists joining us in person are Joey Chen, Leader of Security Research at Cisco Talos, and Dr. Chen E. Crystal Tu, Security Assistant Research Fellow at the INDSR. And joining us remotely on the screen, Jason Van Der Schief, Fellow of the Cyber Technology and Security Programs at ASPI. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and all of our speakers with a warm round of applause. Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here again. So this is my first time returning this forum under my Cisco capacities. So I initiated this forum for today because I noticed that with advanced technology, there are a few very important emerging threats to the world, especially to the democratic society. So today I'd like to share a few insights for myself and from my esteemed co-workers from INDSR and Cisco Talos. And we have Jason online. Jason, can you hear us? Oh, yeah, we got Jason. Hello, Jason. Jason is the esteemed fellow from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. He's the a brand of SP's work whose technology we trust. So later on, he will share with us about his observation and insight. So I have a very simple deck to introduce today's. So I have a very simple deck to kick off today's discussions. So as I just mentioned, we notice a few threats to the modern world with the advanced technology. So you can notice from my slide, we have lots of new vulnerabilities, risks, and the threat from aging infrastructure we call tech debt. Nowadays, it's legally binding in the States to refresh all the old internet gears, but not in Taiwan. So today we'd like to share with you what we find out about this serious issue. And the second layer is the geopolitical dynamics. As all of you may be aware that today is the first day of Trump-Xi summit, which is the repercussions may be very important to Taiwan. And the third largest layer is about AI. I think everybody is aware how serious, what kind of damage AI can do for us after 2 years, the advanced invention of the AI technology. Okay, so AI is a good thing, but on the contrary, it can do bad. So from the static knowledge to real-time knowledge, it can help us to do a lot of decision-making and works. However, we need to recognize the harms it may bring to us. Cisco is one of the 12 companies we can join in Anthropic's Project Glasswing. I'm not sure if the audience are aware about this project. It's talking about the LLM Anthropic invented called missiles. Cisco worldwide, we have 80 security engineers. What missiles can do is better than 80 security engineers in one night. It can find out the vulnerability back to 27 years ago. So it's truly amazing and scary at the same time. Moving on to the next risk I'd like to highlight is the tech debt I just mentioned to you. So you can notice that over 40% of the vulnerability impacted is about end-of-life systems. So Cisco is 42 years old this year, so we sold a lot of gears 40 years ago, so it created a lot of problem if the customers do not renew their equipments. So last threat is about quantum. Later on, Dr. Du will introduce the PQC roadmap. So to this point, I'd like to share with you that I just mentioned missiles, the AI threat that can bring to the world. So with the speed of quantum, it can be very, very scary. So this is my simple introduction. So I'd like to turn the floor to our online co-worker, Jason, the esteemed scholar from SP. Actually, it's almost 11 p.m. to his time zone. So thank you very much, Jason, for joining us.
As I was saying, I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. It's worth staying up until 11 o'clock. I do love being in Taiwan. So thank you again for having me. As Crystal mentioned, my name is Jason van der Scheef, and I'm a non-resident fellow with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's Cyber Technology and Security Program, where my work focuses on critical infrastructure, trusted technology, sovereign capability, and the resilience of digital supply chains across the Indo-Pacific. And to start us off, I want to start with a very simple proposition, and that is that legacy digital infrastructure is no longer just an IT problem. It is, in fact, a national resilience problem. It's also an economic problem, and increasingly, it has become a national security problem. When we talk about legacy systems, people often imagine old servers in a dusty government basement. Whilst those do exist, the reality is much broader and much more serious than that. So legacy infrastructure today includes outdated operating systems, unsupported networking equipment, aging industrial control systems, fragmented databases, unpatched consumer hardware, and the list goes on, but it also increasingly includes opaque cloud and supply chain dependencies. In many countries, these systems quietly underpin the daily functioning of government, energy, transport, healthcare, finance, and communication. And the public rarely sees them until something breaks. And it's that invisibility that's really part of the challenge, because digital infrastructure has become so embedded into daily life that we now treat it as ambient. We all notice when the electricity fails, we notice when the roads are closed, but we rarely think about the digital systems that are coordinating public services, the systems moving money, routing logistics, authenticating our identities, or supporting a crisis response. Yet those systems are now foundational to state capacity. One of the recurring themes in ASPI's work over the past 2 years, and Crystal touched on it in our report, In Whose Tech We Trust, has really been about unpacking that trust in technology is no longer purely a technical issue. It's really strategic. The question is no longer simply, does this technology work? It's who builds it, who maintains it, who can access it, and what happens if it fails under pressure. That conversation, as we all really are well aware, started around telecommunications and 5G, but it has rapidly expanded into now cloud infrastructure, digital identity systems, the subsea cables that provide us 90% of our internet, consumer networking equipment, and of course, industrial technology supply chains. And the uncomfortable reality is that, like any debt, when technical debt accumulates quietly, it does so until stress reveals it all at once. And that stress doesn't have to come from conflict. It can come from a cyber attack, a natural disaster, a supply chain disruption or pandemic, a software dependency failure, or simply institutional inertia. And increasingly, we are seeing these factors converge. In Australia, we've been having similar conversations around critical infrastructure and what we now call national safety. So not just traditional national security in the defence sense, but the resilience of the systems Australians rely on every day. The challenge is that governments often approach digital transformation as an efficiency exercise rather than a resilience exercise. And so digital government programs are framed around convenience, cost reduction, and service delivery. And as much as those things matter, the risk is once digital systems become essential to social and economic continuity, they become critical infrastructure in their own right. And so a compromised digital identity platform, a failure in a government payment system, or disruption to healthcare infrastructure would now create cascading societal effects very quickly. And this is where we see legacy systems have really become dangerous. Most organizations know they have aging infrastructure. They know certain systems are unsupported or difficult to patch, but replacing them is expensive, it's operationally risky, and in the boardroom, it can be politically unappealing. So the tendency is to defer, to isolate, to mitigate around the edges, and to hope. But technical debt compounds. What begins a cost-saving measure gradually becomes a structural dependency. Eventually, organizations become trapped by the very systems they know they need to replace. One of the things that we've been exploring, and it will be in upcoming work that we've collaborated with Cisco on, is that this challenge is not purely technological. It's also institutional and economic as well. Legacy infrastructure persists because incentives often reward continuity over disruption. Procurement systems favor short-term affordability, this year's budget, over long-term resilience, next year's budget. And capital expenditure is easier to delay than operational risk is often to quantify. And so in many cases, there is simply no ownership, no clear ownership of the problem across government. And this creates a really dangerous asymmetry. Adversaries only need to identify one overlooked dependency. They only need to find one unsupported device, one poorly understood supplier relationship, or one aging system hidden deep inside a critical workflow. And now they have automated tools to be able to do so. Meanwhile, the defenders are attempting to secure a sprawling environment built over decades, often operating without full visibility into how everything connects together anymore. It's been built over decades. The original architects are nowhere to be found. And increasingly, that threat is not only software. One of the major shifts that we're seeing is the growing importance of hardware trust and supply chain integrity. And we've written recently about concerns ranging from compromised solar inverters to trusted circuit board manufacturing and insecure consumer networking equipment. And this matters because modern infrastructure is no longer a collection of isolated systems. It's an interconnected ecosystem of cloud platforms, embedded devices, industrial controllers, sensors, telecommunications infrastructure, and consumer technology. And unfortunately, the attack surface is everywhere. And in many countries, legacy infrastructure intersects with geopolitical dependency in particularly uncomfortable ways. And that's why I think the framing of this discussion here today is so very important, because this is not really about nostalgia for old technology or frustration with slow procurement cycles. It's about whether states can maintain operational continuity and sovereign decision-making in an increasingly contested technological environment. Taiwan is obviously operating at the sharp end of many of these pressures, but the underlying dynamics are not necessarily unique to Taiwan. Across the Indo-Pacific, and frankly across much of the democratic world, we're confronting the same reality. Digital infrastructure built during a more stable era is now being stress tested in a much harsher strategic environment. And the systems we depend on most are often the hardest to modernize. The good news is that awareness is improving. Governments are beginning to recognize that resilience is not only about cyber defense at the perimeter, it's also about architecture, governance, visibility, discipline in procurement, establishing trusted supply chains, and operational adaptability. But awareness alone is not enough. The challenge now is moving from acknowledgement to execution before a major crisis forces that transition under far worse conditions. Because the longer technical debt accumulates, the more expensive, disruptive, and strategically dangerous it becomes. And by the time legacy infrastructure becomes visible to the public, it is often already a crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. It's very, the audience is applauding. I'm sorry to interrupt. So thank you, Jason, for your sharing. I think this legacy product, it should be the top of mind for Taiwanese government. So maybe later on you can advise how Taiwanese government should prioritize their digital infrastructure budget. I think budget is always what the government trying to say they cannot do it. So I'd like to have your advice. So the next one is Dr. Crystal Du from ISDSR. She's a long-term friend of mine and my husband. So thank you, Dr. Du. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Crystal, for the introductions. I'm Crystal Du from Institute for National Defense and Security Research. So it's a full sponsors by Ministry of National Defense. So the usual caveat applies that this is my individual research and not really represent MD's presentations, positions on these issues. So I want to extend a little bit about Jason's talk about the tech debt. I would want to explore a little bit about the invisible infrastructure, the hidden tech debt that currently exists in our modernized network framework. So the challenge I would say is in the work is to try to visualize those invisible factors in the network. So as most of the folks in the Internet Governance Forum will be very familiar with this kind of framework, is that a lot of the sovereignty issues happens in the many different kind of boundaries. The first boundaries usually happens in the audit is the cloud and data sovereignty issues. That's how the data is transferred in the among the cloud. And the second part of the audit is how you govern the domain name system namespace governance. How you have you resolve the domain names through your own DNS, or you are using the foreign DNS to sovereign that. And many of the national power decisions happens in the DNS levels, and it's also happening in Taiwan. And the final part is the certificate and PKI infrastructures, how you build your certificate authorities, and how you give the kind of root of trust to the peers. But in many of these kind of the boundary and framework in the sovereignty and governance, that there are still invisible gaps you will see here. And all those invisible gaps I'll call it the invisible substrate. It's the stuff that just work until it doesn't. So when it's for the kind of the examples I share here, we need to go back into the root of trust, how the trust is actually built upon. So if you look at those invisible infrastructures, the modern network usually has consistency built on these three kind of methods. So the trust must be built upon the physical measurement. So you need to go back to the foundational physical measurement, which is time step. So the trust is the first is the times. So the time we currently have the NTP protocols, but it has no authentication by default. We have one IFC, but it's not really widely adopted. And second is the GPS times. Time is actually, a lot of places the calibration is done by GPS signals, which naturally we'll talk about a little bit about the cases Cisco has. So it's anchored to the satellite constellations, which is ruled by the US GPS systems, or by the Beidou in China, or Galileos in Europe. And also there's the advanced precision time protocols by IEEE used in finance and telecoms, but it's another widespread protocol used in enterprise IT. And the second part is the hash encryptions are usually based on your random number generators. So the random number generator, there's two kinds of random number generator. One is from the hardware, true randoms from heat noises for electronics. And the second part is mostly using what we call the software pseudo-random generators. It might be very similar when you just have a small scale applications, but you are generating a lot of random numbers. It actually matters in scales. It's almost invisible how the cloud actually generates these through their entropy pools. It's invisible to the tenants. So the jurisdiction matters that how you keep generate based on this hardware, it becomes the rule of the trust. And one of the forgotten decision layer on the PKI is that the current days that browser and OS operation system rule of trust is usually lies on the few of the numbers of companies. And most of organizations, your PKI is just something decision that just happened in the past, and you don't really have the complete map of how many trust anchor you actually have in your entire enterprise IT network. And it has several instances we can see. One of the early example is Digi Notar's instance in 2011. It's Dutch companies that has their certificate authorities, and it being hacked and still the hackers steal about 500 of their certificates. The issue is that Dutch government used almost entirely about Digi Stars. So after the hacks, it was forced to take over by Dutch government, and a lot of the digital service by Dutch government is completely disrupted by this incident. And the second examples we see, probably people have some memory here, is the last year's the Google removed Chunghwa Telecom's certificate authority from Google rule of stores, and it cited the governance issues that have been found in the past few years. So it just shows how the kind of PKI infrastructure is actually a forgotten decision layer. It is decided by very few companies. It shows where the sovereign boundary actually is. So it's actually three types of incident that is that time we usually assume the reliability will always on, and entropy is it's a tendency that usually ungoverned, and for the PKI it's usually just you forgot the decision when is that happening. So if we think about the timeline for PQC transitions, how we transit from your encryption algorithm from one to the others, I think there's two cautionary tales based on the network transitions happening in the past 30 years that might have some lessons we can look at. So the first example I drove here is IPv6. It's standardized in 1998, but still until today is still deploying. And the global deployment rate is very in different levels. But the transitions usually has a kind of decision in its own. If there's no actually enforcing functions, there will be no transitions. And we'll see here in a lot of enterprise IT is that the dual stack that using IPv4 and IPv6, it was meant to be a short bridge, but in a lot of places it just become the permanent state. You are permanently has the dual stack in your network. So a lot of the devices, the legacy devices or constrained IT or OT, not available for IPv6 will be really likely to be resistant to PQC in the future. And the other cautionary tales I will think about is the TLS, ATTS modernization. It shows a lot of hidden middle box in your network. So transport layer security 1.3 is a better protocols, but the transitions from 1.0 to 1.2 is actually a decision making by a lot of browser, by Chrome's, by Apple's softwares, and Firefox. It's a decision made by browsers in companies in 2018. So after the decisions were made that the transitions, a lot of companies found their internal website or their services has a lot of the middle layers that has no ideas about what they are actually doing in the network. For example, like the deep packet inspectors usually silently break the kind of handshake in the middles, or the load balancers does not really have the kind of handshake structures, and this kind of legacy system just silently disappear in your visibilities. So combining these two lessons, we'll see IPv6 is a no forcing function, there will be no transitions. And the TLS transport layer security is that usually you have surprise in the middle of the network. So the PQC transition is based on the algorithms, will most likely happens for both scenarios, which is actually happened in the real life already. So in the Google and Cloudflare, they test PQC hybrid trials in 2023 and 2024. So what they are trying to do is that to see whether the Cloudflare deployed the kind of PQC hybrid crystal key algorithm in their TLS, and they try to cooperate with Google Chrome to see how well it's actually executed. And what they found is that the key share for the PQC algorithm is significantly larger than the equivalent their previous algorithm. So the packet size for the key share is exceeding the one network packet in some of the old system. So even for when they try to establish a TLS connection handshake, the earliest client and hello message will just exceed that kind of packet. So it cannot really establish a handshake. So the connection will just time out. So it's one of the failure modes actually is just because of the packet size of these all routers or intermediate server or firewalls. So it shows how the kind of the implementations it actually has a lot of hardware and middle layers and invisible layers below it. So we see the PQC, the urgency is real. We see the harvest nows and defibrillators fields, but we need to be reminded that their implementation maturity is uneven. Some of the algorithm is validated, but the library is relatively young. And we have a lot of hybrid scheme that has complexity like IPv6 and IPv4. And there are a lot of visible layers remain to be found in the process. And a lot of old constrained devices will most likely revisit change. And if you buy the new system or new framework, new hardware is will not guarantee the migrations. So the only way forward, I would say, is using the kind of transition to be a forcing function to find all the invisible infrastructures, build a kind of agility in the crypto algorithms, and try to establish your governance layers. So many of the issues that talk about the infrastructures are based on engineering realities, and all the engineering realities actually have their own governance functions. So that's who can certificate the critical infrastructures, what happens in the compromises, or who has authority over this trust, and how to mandate the authorities. So I would say that we are probably in the way to design a kind of principle for a kind of resilient infrastructures that will based on the visible sovereignties that every dependency need to have a named owner, jurisdictions, and trials, and crypto agilities that algorithms should be able to configure, not just hard code it in your firmware system, and try to switch. In the future, you can switch the kind of crypto algorithm in the futures. You need to aware the last substrates like time, entropy, and PKI, and all this need to be governed by the application here. And the migration in the BP stage, you can't really just leave the update like you are doing for the cloud. And you need to continue to test the interoperability. So I think that's all I need discussion today, and hope you find there's something in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Christoph, for bringing us to another layer of the problem. So as you are aware, many of the most important dependency issues are not visible to users, policymakers, or even system owners. So later on, I made consult 3 panelists' opinion on what should be the ideal design principle for the government or the policymaker. So the next one is Joy Chen from Cisco Talos. He is a very talented cybersecurity researcher, and his expertise is PL. He has a lot of expertise. So one of his expertise is PLA, cyber operation. He's very, very young, very, very talented. So I'm very happy to have him today to share the experiences from Cisco on the Ukrainian and Russian war. So the floor is yours, Joey.
Yep, thank you. My name is Joey Chen, and I'm a security research technical leader in Cisco Talos. And here I'm going to talk about a project Power Up, which is Talos project. And yeah, just follow up the Dr. Crystal 2, just saying that time is a very critical point at the infrastructure stuff, because I have to say, Taiwan and our best friend, that was like a kind of cyber attack every day, and Ukraine and Russia also do this well. But in this project, we found out the other kind of big issue about the timing. So here I'm going to introduce about it. So about the Ukraine, during this time, during the Russia and Ukraine, we found out Russia attacked Ukraine a lot. Just like for the past 10 years, they're trying to attack their critical infrastructure several times. And in 2015 and 2016, they truly successfully using the malwares to attack their power grid and trying to make it interrupted during the power system, and trying to destruction their power systems for the whole city or probably for whole regions. And after 2022, we found out they Russian truly invasion the Ukraine, and we're starting to monitor all of the network cyber attack during that period of time, and we found out there's a lot of cyber attack during that of time. And in 2022 April, we found out this kind of backdoors, malwares trying to attack their power grid again. And we block it, but however, in some of the power grid or power station, they still success, and they trying to interrupt and trying to stop their power to send out to all the station and for use. Yeah, and we also monitor during that of time. In February to September, the attack to Ukraine is increasingly a lot. It's more than the global attack. So we believe a lot of Russian threats, even state-sponsored attacks, that were all targeting Ukraine. And we also found out the 2022 March and June increased a lot, which means they are like doing an operation stuff, which means someone give them orders and using like time to attack their infrastructure or companies, or even critical infrastructures like power grid or like water, something or stuff. So we believe they are taking the missions and they're using cyber attack, trying to disrupt their entire nation. So the big issue is they're trying to attack their power stuff. And because Ukraine Power Company is a very, very good customer with Cisco, so they try to contact us and ask us, is there any possibility that we can help them? So we talk to them and we're trying to fully understand what's their issue. The issue is they have a GPS ground control station. They will try to send out a signal to the GPS signal satellite, and the satellite will transmit all the signal to every GPS time receiver, and those time receiver will be in every power stations. So which means they can help to synchronize the time. But however, the Russian soldiers and a lot of Russians, maybe tanks, etc., they will bring up an interrupt machine. And in that interrupt machine is quite cheap, as you can see, which means like only 18,000 Taiwanese dollars, and which is made by Taiwan. But however, we believe that the carry is probably not made in Taiwan. And so the first issue is they trying to think, okay, they trying to fix this kind of issue. they come out is automatic clock probably can solve this kind of issue. But during that time, the Ukraine is not able to buy a lot of automatic clock because the clock is very expensive, and also the clock have to install and set up in every power station, which is quite difficult to them. And also they increased another issue is if the power station got a missile, got interrupted by an aircraft, the autumn clock can be defensed by it. Yeah, so that's another issue. So they're trying to fully understand, is there any solutions that Cisco can help? Yeah, first thing is, okay, can Cisco build up this kind of clock? Yeah, we talk about that to a lot of engineers, researchers, and we think, okay, that's not going to happen because it's quite difficult for us because it's another area for the research stuff, and we don't have this kind of research capability. So we talk to the industrial engineers, and they say this kind of industrial switch probably able to use for that kind of situations because it can live in the very, very hard situations, like the temperature is quite hard in deserts or probably in cold, very cold weathers. You also can protect it, and you also can help them to have fight the motivations glitch. Like even the missiles got hit, it also can work stabilize. So they think if we just like modify the software and try to use this industrial switch, probably can help them to build a very, very similar to automatic clock devices. Yeah, so they started to think. So the two key point is they're trying to make it stable and using this industrial switch to talk with the PMU to make it communications. And they have to make, if the GPS signal got interrupted, and we have to use our industrial switches to that PMU keep working and keep sending signal to the power transmission network to enable the controller know the workstation are stable and workable. Yeah. So the first thing is they modify the software, and using this feature, if they lost signal, PMU gonna stop transmission. So the power station gotta be fail. So they starting to fixing the industrial switch software, and they make it cheating or guiding the signal. If the GPS is no signal, so PMU still can receive the message from the industrial switch machine and keep sending the transmission to the power grid transmission control centers. And the second part is they have to make the industrial switches to calculate the time to make it if there is loss in GPS time, it can be calculated the correct time to accuracy, very, very specific time to make it trustable, to make the PMU can sending the automation time to the control station. And when the GPS got connected, it can be like very simultaneously synchronize the time and very specifically. Yeah. So this is what we're trying to do to helping them to solve this kind of issue. And when the software engineers got developed this kind of two features, and we also sending a lot of industrial switches, just like as your pictures can see. So we deploy and install them to all of the power stations and make their power grid stable and work around, make the Ukraine's power up, the light keeps up. Yeah, so this is how the cases story.
Thank you, Joy. So I think I named today's session as resiliency and emerging technology threats. So I think my point is from AI, quantum, legacy products are the stress test of our current digital infrastructure. So I'm always wondering what we should do. Are we aware of it? So how can we change it? So now is the interaction session. So I'd like to ask Jason, Crystal, and Joy, what are maybe the top three recommendation for you to advise the Taiwanese policymaker from your respectives? Jason,
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, I have 5, but I'll try and make them really quick, so it only takes the time for 3. I mean, I think the first one that we like to talk about is you have to make it visible. So from a government perspective, actually mandating the idea of life cycle asset registers and end-of-life reporting. That's sort of the first one. The second one is setting a set of minimum standards. So what is the absolute floor that you would require everyone to meet, and then what are the restrictions around that? Because visibility without consequence is not particularly useful. The third one really quickly is fixing procurement. So embedding life cycle obligations in government contracts. So not yielding to large companies that say, oh, just give us another year. We can't get hold of this because of a supply chain issue. I think that's the sort of third one. Accountability. So again, not being able to just give people responsibility without accountability. That means assurance, auditing, and then actually linking incident reporting. So being able to look at incidents that occur and say that was due to end of life, end of support, unsupported technology, hardware or software. And then I think the last one is to enable transition. So provide incentives, provide guidance, and provide coordinated programs that make it easy for government and industry to be able to do that. And that's really important inside government. One of the things we often find is that government is sometimes the worst at adopting their own policies. So I think that's also very, very important as well.
Thank you. How about you, Dr. Xuzhou?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So actually, I will say, since it's about internet governance, so the 3 invisible that I talk about here about time, entropy, and PKI, I think the first thing first is you need to find out all the stakeholders with these discussions. Like PKI is much more easier. It's obviously in the Chonghua data counts here in Taiwan, but times and random numbers, entropies, others are what the other stakeholders are less visible to the general public. Like when I talk about times, I guess most of the people in the cloud might not really understand who would actually have the standardized time here in Taiwan. So the first is try to mapping and bring all the stakeholders. And the second part will be try to figure out the forcing functions about this transition and changes, because different stakeholders, they have their different incentives and how they govern their services and infrastructures. And you can't really forcing anything if that you are not understanding their underlying problems or political economic situations. And the third one will be try to find aligned interests among the stakeholders that we try to find what is the best best way forwards. And I think that's a way to think about visualizing all these invisible tech depths and try to mapping the way forwards for overcoming these issues, and mostly governance issues, not exactly about technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. How about you, Joey? What's your take?
Yeah. So here I can share something about my experience, because I do a lot of research about cyber attack, and also there's a lot of state-sponsored attack. They are no longer targeting the newish stuff. They are more likely to target the legacy product, because they know the legacy product, their software no longer updating. So they know they can use a known exploit or other stuff. They easily to attack and infiltrating and compromise those devices. And if you got compromises, then those devices, you find the owner, the company, they are no longer to serve you, because those devices are end of life. So which means they cannot solve the issue to you. Yeah. So if if we no longer solve this kind of issue, the data they're gonna steal, they continue stealing those data, and you cannot easily to visible and identify them. And what they stole, even those data are encryption, highly encryption, but they got a PQC. So maybe one of the day they can decryption all of the encryption data. They got all of the history data that you have. So these two issues is the combination issue, I think, because the tech debt probably can help the threat actor and stealing the data more easily, and they also using PQC to decryption all the encryption data that you have right now. So yeah, I believe this gonna be a strategic issue, and there's something way we can try to solve. Yeah.
Thank you, Joy. I think today's discussion is very crucial nowadays because Taiwan is not only an interconnected economy, but Taiwan is also the AI manufacturing node for the entire world. So the digital sovereignty and resiliency for Taiwan does not mean isolation, but mean trusted resiliency by design from today's three topics. So I think we have 10 minutes left for today's discussion. I'm wondering if there are any questions from the floor. Lu 对对，如果中文没问题，我们可以协助翻译。好像大家都对。Today we have two crystals on the panel, so everything's crystal clear to everyone. So
I would just
please.
actually just make a little and so is that I should mention in Joy's slide. So does anyone knows how this electronic device is keeping up with time? It's called crystal oscillators. Actually, right in his slide. 就是大家知道大部分的这些电子设备是怎么记录时间？它是用精品振荡器，就是 crystal oscillator 来追踪时间。所以我们今天刚好有两个 crystal 在上面，然后我们今天在 panel 上面讨论时间。对，这其实是很重要的元件，就是它是透过音频的晶体的振荡去计算秒，所以在大部分的你的这些电子的设备里面，它其实都有这样子的装备，它是帮助去记录时间。这个东西叫 crystal oscillator。我们今天刚好有两个 crystal 在台上。
Jason, because we have still 10 minutes left, so I'm wondering, can you give us some advice about almost every government organization told us they don't have money. So how should government prioritize and really think about how to tackle the tech debt issues? Because from the first-hand experiences of Joy and mine, I think Taiwan's CII is facing very critical problem right now.
Yeah, it's a tough one because there's only so much money, and there's lots of parts of the budget that want that money to go into. I think really, and I'll use Australia as an example here, because I think as we often speak about, Australia has a lot to learn from the daily kind of cyber incidents that Taiwan deals with. But I think Taiwan has the ability to sort of look at some of the work that Australia did early on, and maybe give that some consideration. And there's really what I would consider three core documents which help sort of outline this. The first one is called the Essential 8, and the Essential 8 is a framework that was established to create a level of baselines of sort of what good cyber hygiene would look like. And the idea was that it could be adopted both in government and within industry at a reasonably low cost at the baseline. There are playbooks, if you like, of how to harden a Windows-based environment, good practices, making sure that you update your operating systems and all of those things within certain periods of time. We all enjoy Patch Tuesday when it comes. Actually pressing yes, I will upgrade my computer. That was kind of the first one, and that was an introduction that then was leveraged with what initially started as a government document, the Information Security Manual. This is published by the Australian Security Directorate, ASD. And this is really broken down into a number of directives that address more bits of the detail. And again, this is used at all classifications within government and ideally within industry. And then there's a level of enforcement around that at an industry-based level. And we obviously think about critical infrastructure, telecommunications, energy. That was all done independently. So there was a telecommunications regulator, there was an energy regulator, the ports, airports, these were all regulated separately. And in 2018, there was a key piece of legislation that was written called the Security of Critical Infrastructure, or we call it the SOCI Act. And that initially focused on a handful of those industries, and it provided a common framework that cyber hygiene would be adopted, and then also incidents would be reported against. That is now across 11 sectors. It includes data centers, obviously all of the kind of key things that we think about, finance, healthcare, energy, telecommunications. The bit that's really interesting, I think, around the way that legislation was brought together was there was a large amount of community consultation. Before I was at ASPI, I was in industry, and I was actually part of the community group that engaged with the government to help feed what became that draft legislation. But beyond that, they have today these sort of industry security network groups where members of industry in that specific vertical market meet alongside government, and they share information based on the types of things that are happening to them. And the idea is that it's very much, anything that's said in those rooms is obviously not to be used in a kind of competitively commercial aspect. But what it means is, Australia's geographically a massive country. So if I'm a water operator in Queensland or the Northeast versus a water operator in Western Australia on the Southwest, I might be subject to the same types of attacks, different types of attacks. They might be happening at different times. And I think this is the piece that we've spoken about historically as kind of cooperation between Australia and Taiwan is those types of broader industry groups. And what that really means is government is in a position to not just be the ones who are telling you what to do. They get sort of that feedback, but also it gives a grasp of where industry is willing to spend money, where they aren't willing to spend money, and then where that sort of works. And I think that's why, I think about my sort of fifth topic of how government can help is it's about finding incentives, and those don't need to be really, really large. Government should not be responsible for paying for industry to upgrade their technology. But they should be able to find ways to do that. And sometimes it's not the largest organizations that need the most help. Sometimes it's smaller organizations because they can be equally at risk. And I think it's finding this very delicate balance. How that fits in the budget is always a challenge. And even in, as we kind of touched on with the other panelists around, quantum in particular is this idea of, yes, we need to be able to guard against quantum threats. We obviously have harvest now, decrypt later as a real threat. But one of the biggest problems people don't actually know which cryptography they're running in a lot of instances. And so that's a place where a small amount of money can be put to work very, very well by saying, hey, let's get an inventory of all of the different types of cryptography that you are using. Because once we have that inventory, then we can make a plan of where we need to change. And I think it's sort of shifting that idea a little bit of, this doesn't have to be wholesale replacement. Let's work out what those things look like, and then also provide leniency. And I think the information security manual that Australia has does this very well, which says in certain circumstances we're not going to be able to replace things when we said that we would, or how we want to. We have to have some leniency around that, but we have to keep a close eye on that. So I'll give you a little bit of time to make that change, but you're going to report to me every 3 months, 6 months that the state of your cyber estate has not been compromised, you haven't run into any issues, and then we can escalate that if we need to. So I think it's a little bit of really working, with the stakeholders, whether that's industry or government departments, to not just wait for the big budget cycle where we replace all of the equipment at once. We have to have a little bit more nuance on that. And I think as we move more things into the cloud, more software as a service, actually adapting our regulations to suit what the environment looks like.
Thank you, Jason. Our CISO always says security is a team sport, but I will say all the resiliency is a team sport. We need to work together very closely on tackling these new issues. So the very last 30 seconds, I'd like to ask Joy. Taiwan is at the forefront of First Island chain, so if compromise is not inevitable, what will you suggest our infra should be designed?
Our infra need to change a lot, I have to say. Yeah, because as my 10 years research about the state sponsors, directors, I think they also study our infrastructure for 10 years, probably more than 10 years. Because as you can see, the youngest hackers right now just rise, but their team leaders, probably their managers, are really, really old hackers, and they already compromised Taiwan for several times. And they know the deeply infrastructures, how the Taiwanese networks do. So right now, for example, like we use the telecommunications infrastructures. Their managers right now, the directors, managers, probably they deeply understand how their networks work and how their workarounds. For example, like critical switch, core switch, where is the core switch? And their internal core switch, where is it? So they all those devices infrastructures, they can easily tell their teammate to compromise which devices and easily to bypass all the security product and get inside to the internal network and trying to log everything. So from my point of view, I have to say probably reorganize all the infrastructure about the critical infrastructure and the internal infrastructure probably will be necessary, because if we did not change, they gonna keep continually persistence in the network, and for how long I'm not sure, but we definitely unable to see their track maybe in the future or probably in the nearly future.
Thank you, Joy, for your sharing. We are exactly on time, so thank you again, Jason, from US West Coast. So it's time for you to go to bed. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Du and Joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you once again to all of the distinguished moderator and the speaker, especially Justin, who joined us online. So 再次感谢各位讲者以及与谈人 ，Thank you for the excellent time management as well. OK， 那接下来我们的下一场会在2点50分准时开始，再请各位贵宾在休息之后可以回到我们的现场。好，我们最后的一张大合照。